Story 1. The Road of Despair. Charles was an experienced truck driver who had been navigating the roads of the United States for years. He knew every shortcut, every gas station, and every treacherous curve on the highways. His life was solitary, but he enjoyed the freedom the road offered. Recently, he had hired a new assistant, Paul, a young man looking for adventure and some extra money. Paul admired Charles and was eager to learn everything he could about life on the road. One cold winter night, Charles and Paul were tasked with an urgent delivery that would take them through a desolate and seldom traveled road, known as the Road of Despair. The name was not given lightly. Many stories circulated about that route, all involving mysterious disappearances and supernatural occurrences. Charles was not superstitious. He knew he needed to stay alert. "Have you heard about this road?" Paul asked as he adjusted his seatbelt. "I've heard some stories," Charles replied, keeping his eyes on the road. "But I never believed them much. We'll do our job and move on." The journey started peacefully. The road was deserted, and the full moon illuminated the path ahead. After a few hours of continuous driving, both began to feel the fatigue. Paul suggested a break, and Charles agreed. They stopped in a clearing by the roadside to stretch their legs and have some coffee. While they rested, they heard faint footsteps coming from the darkness. Paul grabbed a flashlight and pointed it toward the sound. The light revealed a woman dressed in white with long, disheveled hair. She seemed lost and helpless. "Are you okay?" Charles asked, approaching cautiously. "I need help," the woman replied, her voice trembling. "My car broke down further up the road. Can you give me a ride to the next town?" Charles and Paul exchanged glances. The situation seemed strange, but they couldn't leave someone in distress. "Sure, get in the truck," Charles said, trying to sound calm. The woman climbed into the cab, sitting between Charles and Paul. Her face was pale, and her eyes had an unsettling gleam. As they continued the journey, the atmosphere inside the truck grew increasingly heavy. Paul, feeling a growing unease, tried to make conversation. "What's your name?" "Yeah." "My name is Anna," the woman replied without looking at him. "Thank you for helping me." Charles felt a shiver run down his spine. Something about Anna didn't seem right. He kept driving, but the road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly as if they were trapped in an infinite loop. Suddenly, the truck began to malfunction. The engine started to sputter and the lights began to flicker. Charles pulled the truck over to the side of the road and got out to check the engine, leaving Paul and Anna in the cab. "This doesn't make sense," Charles muttered, trying to understand what was happening. Paul, feeling increasingly uneasy, looked at Anna, who remained silent, staring straight ahead. "Something's wrong here," Paul said, feeling a growing fear. Charles returned to the cab, his expression serious. "The engine's fine. It shouldn't be acting up like this. Let's try to move on." But before they could leave, Anna began to speak in a strange, almost hypnotic tone. "You shouldn't be here. This road is cursed." Paul and Charles exchanged glances, fear clearly visible on their faces. "What do you mean?" Charles asked, trying to stay calm. "Those who travel this road never reach their destination," Anna continued, her voice now filled with deep sorrow. "I am one of those lost souls." Suddenly, Anna's figure began to change. Her skin became translucent, and her eyes glowed with a ghostly light. Charles and Paul felt a chilling cold invade the truck's cab. "Oh my God, what's happening?" Paul exclaimed, trying to open the door to escape, but it was locked. "You need to leave here," said Anna, now clearly a supernatural entity, "before you are condemned to wander this road forever." Charles, feeling the urgency of the situation, tried to start the truck again. To his surprise, the engine started without any issues this time. He accelerated, and the truck sped down the road. As they drove at full speed, Anna's figure began to fade. "Remember what I said," were her last words, before disappearing completely. The truck continued down the road, and within minutes, Charles and Paul saw the lights of a town in the distance. The feeling of relief was immediate, but both knew that what they had experienced was real. Upon reaching the town, they stopped at a gas station and got out of the truck, still stunned. A local attendant, seeing their disturbed expressions, approached them. "You guys look like you've seen a ghost," said, half-jokingly. "In a way, we did," Charles replied, trying to process what had happened. "Have you heard of a woman named Anna on the Road of Despair?" The attendant grew serious. You met Anna? She's a legend around here. They say she died in a car accident on that road years ago, and that her spirit still wanders there, trying to warn drivers of the dangers. Charles and Paul exchanged looks, understanding the gravity of what they had experienced. We met her, Paul said, his voice trembling, and she saved us. The attendant nodded. Many say the road is cursed. You were lucky to escape. Charles and Paul thanked the attendant and continued their journey, now with a new perspective on the stories and legends of the roads they traveled. They knew they needed to be more cautious and heed the warnings they encountered along the way. The two friends returned to their routine, but never forgot the night they met Anna on the road of despair. The experience marked them deeply, and they shared the story with other truckers as a warning and a reminder of the hidden dangers that can lurk on lonely roads. Story 2. Curve of Death. The road winding through the interior mountains was known for its breathtaking scenery and treacherous curves. Among them was a particularly famous curve called by the locals the Curve of Death. Many fatal accidents had occurred there over the years, and dark stories circulated about the spirits of the victims who still haunted the place. Julia, a young driver, and her younger brother, Luke, were traveling to visit their grandparents, who lived in a small town on the other side of the mountain. Julia was an experienced driver and knew the trip would be long and challenging, especially passing through the Curve of Death. However, she didn't pay much attention to the legends and was more concerned about Luke's safety. Have you heard the stories about this road? Luke asked, as he adjusted the car radio. They say the Curve of Death is haunted. Julia smiled, trying to reassure her brother. They're just stories to scare travelers. Don't worry, we'll be fine. As they progressed along the road, the weather began to change. Dark clouds formed in the sky, and a thick fog began to rise, making visibility increasingly difficult. Julia turned on the headlights and slowed down, trying to stay calm. Can you see anything? Luke asked, tightening his seatbelt. Not much, Julia replied, gripping the steering wheel. This fog is really strange. Stay alert. As they approached the Curve of Death, the fog seemed to become even denser, almost tangible. Suddenly, Julia saw something on the side of the road. A slender, pale figure dressed in white, desperately waving. Someone's there, Luke exclaimed, pointing to the figure. Julia carefully stopped the car and rolled down the window. Do you need help? She asked, trying to see better through the fog. The figure slowly approached. It was a young woman with a pale face and sad eyes. Please help me, she said, her voice full of despair. My car went off the cliff. My boyfriend is trapped down there. Julia and Luke exchanged looks. Let's help, Luke said, already opening the car door. Wait, Julia said, holding her brother's arm. This could be dangerous. We need to be careful. The two got out of the car and followed the woman to the edge of the road. Down below, on the cliff, they saw a wrecked car, partially hidden by vegetation. He's in there, the woman said, pointing to the car. I couldn't get him out. Julia grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment and began to carefully descend the cliff, while Luke held the woman's hand for support. As they approached the car, they heard faint groans coming from inside. We're going to get you out of there, Julia said, trying to open the crushed door. With effort, she managed to open it and saw a young man trapped in the wreckage. Luke helped me pull him out. Working together, they managed to free the young man and bring him to a safe spot on the road. He was injured but conscious. What happened? Julia asked, examining his wounds. We were driving when suddenly something appeared on the road, the young man said, panting. I lost control of the car, and we went off the cliff. My girlfriend went to get help. Julia looked at the young woman who had guided them to the car. She was no longer there. Where did she go? She asked, confused. Luke looked around but saw no sign of the woman. She was right here. She disappeared. The three stood in silence for a moment, trying to understand what had happened. Suddenly, the young man let out a cry of pain and fainted. We need to get him to the hospital immediately, Julia said, helping Luke load him into the car. As they drove back to town, Julia couldn't stop thinking about the woman who had disappeared. Luke, do you think she was a ghost? She asked, her voice trembling. Luke was silent for a moment before answering. Maybe. There are many stories about the Curve of Death. Maybe she was trying to help us. They arrived at the hospital and left the young man in the care of the doctors. Julia and Luke stayed in the waiting room, reflecting on what had happened. "I think we need to know more about this curve," Julia said. "Maybe there's something we can do to help the spirits still trapped there." In the following days, Julia and Luke researched the history of the curve of death. They discovered that many accidents had occurred there over the years, and several people had lost their lives. Among them was a young woman named Claire, who had died in an accident with her boyfriend. The circumstances of the accident were mysterious, and many believed that Claire's spirit still wandered the road, trying to prevent others from suffering the same fate. "We need to do something," Julia said, determined. "Maybe there's a way to appease Claire's spirit and prevent more accidents." They consulted a local historian who told them about ancient purification and protection rituals. "You need to perform a ritual at the curve of death," he said. "Light candles, recite prayers, and ask for the peace of the spirits. This might help them find rest." The next night, Julia and Luke returned to the curve of death, bringing candles, incense, and a book of ancient prayers. They lit the candles along the road and began reciting the prayers, asking for the peace of the spirits trapped there. As they performed the ritual, the fog began to slowly dissipate, and the heavy atmosphere seemed to lift. They felt a presence around them, but this time it was not threatening, but serene. "Thank you," they heard a soft voice whisper. It was Claire, finally finding peace. With the ritual completed, Julia and Luke returned to the car, feeling a sense of relief and fulfillment. "I think we did it," Julia said, smiling at her brother. "Yes," Luke agreed. "I think Claire and the other spirits can finally rest." In the following days, news of the ritual performed by Julia and Luke spread through the town. The locals began to see the curve of death differently, no longer as a place of fear, but as a place of remembrance and respect. Julia and Luke continued with their lives, but never forgot the experience they had at the curve of death. Claire's story became a local legend, a reminder of the importance of respecting places with tragic histories and never underestimating the power of the unknown. Story 3. The Path of the Doomed. Deep in the dense forest surrounding the small town of Black Ridge, there was an old and forgotten road, known only by the oldest residents as the Path of the Doomed. They said that anyone who ventured onto that road at night risked never returning. Over the years, countless reports of mysterious disappearances and sightings of vengeful spirits emerged, feeding the sinister reputation of the place. Robert, an investigative journalist known for his determination to uncover mysteries, had heard about the Path of the Doomed during one of his research projects. Fascinated by the story, he decided that this would be his next big story. To accompany him, he invited his colleague Anna, a talented photographer who shared his interest in the supernatural. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Anna asked while reviewing her photographic equipment. "This place has a terrible reputation." "Precisely why we need to go," Robert replied, adjusting his camera. "If there's any truth to these stories, we need to find out and document it. People have the right to know." Armed with lanterns, cameras, and recorders, Robert and Anna set out for the Path of the Doomed. The road was hard to find, as it had not appeared on any official map for years. Guided by instructions from the oldest residents, they finally reached the entrance to the path, marked by a rusty, almost illegible sign. "This is it," Robert said, with a mix of excitement and apprehension. "Let's go." As they advanced, the forest around them seemed to close in. The vegetation was dense, and the darkness was almost tangible, even with the lanterns lighting the way. The air was cold and damp, and the silence was interrupted only by the occasional chirping of insects and the rustling of leaves. "There's something strange about this place," Anna murmured, feeling a shiver run down her spine. "It feels like we're being watched." Robert nodded, feeling the same discomfort. "Let's keep going. We need to find something concrete." As they walked, they began to find disturbing signs: torn pieces of clothing, old toys, and even some small, makeshift tombstones, indicating that others had passed through there before them and never returned. "This is sinister," Anna said, taking photos of the abandoned object. "Who would do this?" "I don't know," Robert replied, feeling a lump in his throat. "But we need to find out." Suddenly, the lanterns began to flicker, and a thick mist started to form around them. Robert and Anna felt a chilling cold invade the air, and the feeling of being watched grew more intense. "Who's there?" Robert shouted, trying to stay calm. There was no answer, just the soft sound of footsteps in the distance. Anna pointed her camera in the direction of the sound, but the mist was too dense to capture anything clearly. "Let's keep going," Robert said, trying to hide his nervousness. "We need to get to the bottom of this." As they advanced, the mist seemed to move almost consciously, guiding them to a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood an old, decrepit building, an abandoned chapel exuding a sense of desolation and death. "We need to go inside," Robert said, feeling that the answer to the mystery was in there. Carefully, they opened the chapel door and entered. The interior was in ruins, broken pews and shattered windows. On the altar, they found an old ritual book, its pages yellowed and torn. "Look at this," Anna said, picking up the book carefully. "It looks like this place was used for dark rituals." As they examined the book, they heard a low, guttural sound. They turned and saw a dark, hooded figure with eyes glowing like embers. "You shouldn't be here," figure said, its voice echoing through the chapel. "Who are you?" Robert asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "I am the guardian of this place," figure replied. "I protect the secrets of the doomed who were brought here." "What secrets?" Anna asked, feeling a mix of fear and curiosity. "Those who walk this path are destined never to return," the guardian said. "Their souls are trapped here, imprisoned by dark rituals performed long ago. You should not have come." Robert and Anna felt the weight of the guardian's words. "We need to know more," Robert said. "How can we free these souls?" The guardian hesitated for a moment, before responding. "There is a ritual that can free them, but it is dangerous. If you fail, you will be condemned to share their fate." "We're willing to take the risk," Anna said, determined. "Tell us what to do." The guardian began to recite the instructions for the ritual. They needed to draw protection symbols around the chapel, light black candles, and recite a series of ancient incantations. The ritual required concentration and precision, and any mistake could be fatal. Robert and Anna worked together, following the guardian's instructions. The atmosphere around them grew increasingly tense, and the feeling of being watched intensified. When they lit the black candles, the flickering light cast unsettling shadows on the chapel walls. "We're almost there," Robert said, trying to stay calm. "Keep reciting the incantations." Suddenly, the chapel was engulfed by a strong, icy wind. Candles flickered, nearly going out, and the guardian's figure began to dissolve, as if being pulled into another dimension. "Don't stop," the guardian shouted, its voice echoing in the chapel. "You're almost freeing them." With renewed effort, Robert and Anna recited the final words of the ritual. The chapel was enveloped in a bright, intense light, and anguished screams echoed around them. The shadows on the walls began to dissipate, and the wind abruptly ceased. When the light finally faded, the chapel was silent. Robert and Anna were exhausted but knew they had succeeded. The guardian had disappeared, and the oppressive feeling had lifted. "We did it," Anna said, panting. "I think we freed the souls." Robert looked around, feeling a mix of relief and fulfillment. "We need to document this. People need to know what happened here." In the following days, Robert and Anna wrote a detailed article about their experience on the path of the doomed, documenting the ritual, the guardian, and the dark secrets they had uncovered. The article was published to great acclaim, and many were fascinated and terrified by the story. The path of the doomed became a place of interest, but also of respect and caution. Robert and Anna continued their investigations, but now with a new understanding of the dangers of the unknown. They knew they had faced something beyond their comprehension, and that the knowledge they had acquired was both a gift and a curse. The story of the path of the doomed and the guardian became a modern legend, a reminder that some secrets are buried for a reason. Robert and Anna continued their work, always vigilant and ready to face whatever the shadows might hide.